So you guys told me he uploaded balancing game features. Yeah, that's what we're doing right
Hi everyone,
now.
it's me.
Exactly. So we are trying to balance our game. Exactly. That's what we did all day today. Ignore this flickering, okay? Ignore this. It will be fixed soon. I promise. Okay? Will be fixed. So even though it just uploaded, and usually I do not like to react to videos that get uploaded recently. I usually like to wait. I think it's very important for me because I need help with this balancing. Hopefully he has some good tips. Because old guys always have good tips.
Hi
right?
everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about balancing game features. Now this is a question from Josh and Parker who asked, could you go over the process of balancing new game features as
I want to cut him out for a really short second. So we talked to, and I love streaming, you know. I meet so many awesome people. This guy right here, the Crystal Guardians developer, another tower defense developer, really cool, is very often in chat, and we talk about this a lot. And so the way he balances his game is by using bots. And they're stupid bots, of course. They just randomly pick something. And then they try to play the level, and then he collects the data from the bots, telling him, okay, so this bot got to this wave, and this bot got to that wave, and then you can normalize the data and say, see, okay, so bots that choose these items and these towers, they potentially get to this wave. That's essentially how he's doing it. And then he's trying to, whenever he makes a change in the gameplay and in the balance, he lets the bots run. Yeah. So you're in chat right now. Exactly. So that is one way to do it. And I'm currently doing it by hand. I'm trying to craft like something that feels good. And I'm just trying out random different things. I guess I'm currently getting a feel for the game. And again, ignore the flickering. Okay. It's going to be fixed soon. Okay. With demo version update on Steam. 100%. Okay. Let's see.
As they're added to the game. How do you make sure new weapons or spells aren't overpowered, but the player is still able to get enough new content to stay entertained?
So for me, to pause again. I don't want to pause too much, but I want to just add to this. The question is about not adding something overpowered. Yeah, I guess it is. Yeah, I don't want anything to be overpowered. I want to have multiple choices, not just one. That's what I'm trying to do.
You know how many hits an enemy should take to kill, etc.
Yeah.
This is a good question. It's also a tough question. I'm going to preface it with, I think other people have kind of asked indirectly for this in the past. And I've been thinking about it because I was never taught how to do this.
Yeah.
I've never actually sat down and talked with another game developer about how to do this.
Mm-hmm.
It's just something I learned as I went along.
Okay.
And it kind of reminds me of the mathematical proof where you make an assumption and then you make a bunch of deductions, and if you make a deduction that's false, you know your assumption was wrong, so you go back and change it. So I don't know what to call this, but I referred to it when I'm mentioning it to designers who are on my team as stick a pin in it. So this is my method of balancing game features,
okay,
that I call as stick a pin in it. So what I do is I pick one thing to start from, and I pin it. I'm like, I'm going to fix this in place. And then I adjust other things based on that. And when I'm happy with them, I pin them. And then I go on.
I see what he means. Guys, I know what it is. This is a crawling skeleton. The very first enemy in the game has a base HP of 30 and a base speed of 34. I think this right here is the pin. I do not want to change this. I don't want the enemy to walk slower. I don't want it to have less HP. I want this to be pinned. And then we change everything around that pin. That's the first. And so what we do is, for the defender, we try to balance this, the attack speed maybe, the range, health not so much, and the damage, to a point where this against the crawler makes sense. You can pin your first 2 to 3 waves now because those are balanced. Yeah, so I balanced 2 to 3 rounds and they should be pinned now. And then whenever I add a new hero, I go back to those rounds and try to balance those new heroes against those 2, 3 already pinned rounds. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
to a bigger circle of things and I figure out how they work and I pin them. And if ever I have a problem, I go back, take one of the pins out and put in new values for that. That's as simple as it is. I know you were expecting something more complicated, but that's it in a nutshell. So
Okay, guys, nice video. See you tomorrow. What's going on? Is the video done? Wait.
let's walk through an example of how I would do this.
Okay.
Let's say
Yeah.
you're making a role-playing game, because that's what I make.
Yes.
So let's start with the player, and let's start at the player at level 1.
Okay.
So think about what changes when the player levels up. Hit points, skill points, perks. So let's pin one of those. Let's pin hit points. So decide how many hit points the player is going to start with, and then how many hit points they get every level. Now, bear in mind, the amount they get every level is going to change. There may be items that give you temporary hit points. There may be perks that permanently change how many hit points you get when you go up a level.
Yeah.
Their attributes when they start off can adjust that as well. Try to factor all that in, but come up with, like, here's a range. Like, maybe the player starts with 50 hit points, and every time they go up a level, they gain 10. And that can be adjusted a little bit by things. So maybe it's really the range is 5 to 20.
Yeah.
So now what you do is you have an idea, as the player goes up a level, of the range their hit points will be at every level. Write that down, use an Excel spreadsheet, whatever you need to do. That's your first pin.
Okay.
Now, decide how that player is going to mitigate incoming damage. Basically how they reduce it. This could be anything from the armor they're wearing, which may have DR or DT, damage resistance or damage threshold. This is the time where you're going to pick that. You're going to decide whether you're...
I did it right, guys. I actually did it right. Okay, so last example. Okay, I'm sorry. Rusty Sword has an armor pierce of 15 and a physical damage amount of 20. This one is pinned against skeleton, because the skeleton has an armor value of 50. No, I already did it correctly without even knowing. I first pinned the skeleton a long time ago, made it impervious to normal physical damage. So a normal sword with plus 20 damage doesn't do much against it. You only take 10 damage. And then using the armor pierce, you deal a lot more damage to this guy.
Armor has one or the other or both. I've done all those combinations in my games. Damage resistance is usually, here's a percentage of the incoming damage you throw away. It may be all incoming damage. It may be damage of just a particular type. We'll get to that. Damage threshold is usually, unless the damage does at least this much, it does nothing. You throw it away. Sometimes it means you throw it away and then damage over the threshold, all of it gets through. Sometimes it means you subtract the DT from any incoming damage, and if it's positive, then you subtract it. You can do it either way. But you also have to remember there are skills like block and dodge, which will reduce incoming damage.
Yeah, we have that.
And it doesn't do that the same way. Basically, there's a percent chance they succeed.
Yeah.
And then if they succeed, usually the player takes no damage. So what you have to do there is you have to say, okay, if something has a 50% chance of succeeding, then that's like having a DR of 50%.
Yeah.
Half the time it does nothing, and the other half of the time it all gets through. So
Yeah.
you can treat that as the same way you did DR. Remember that there are perks too, and other things that are going to factor in and reduce incoming damage. Don't forget healing. If the player has the ability to heal,
You have that
then
too.
they're
In
going
a tower defense game? Yes. In a tower defense game, we have healing.
to be able to mitigate damage by healing some of it mid-combat, whether it's a heal potion.
Is that scope creep? No. No. It's not scope creep. Absolutely
A
not.
heal spell, a heal skill. Pin that. Then decide on what damage output you want by level. And you're going to break that down probably into the players and the creatures. What you want to do is you want the idea of how many attacks. You're trying to figure out how many attacks it's going to take to bring down an enemy or the player. So for creatures, you have to consider natural attacks or weapons. For players, it's weapons, abilities like spells, and anything they get, perks, skills, that increase that. This should let you calculate what's the damage output of creatures and players.
But isn't this like, so you can forget or miss a combination. And now that you missed a combination, and you know that this guy is the Fallout guy, right? Like, I don't know on how many Fallouts this guy worked, but you know Bethesda games, right? They are notoriously broken. So there's always something that's overpowered. And so, like, I'm pretty sure you can miss something with this. You try to calculate, okay, so if I do this and together with that, you're gonna miss something for sure. Like, it happens all the time. But I guess what he's trying to say is try to find as many combinations as you can that make sense in your mind, that you can come up with yourself, and try to pin those down one by one.
By level. So now you have these charts of here's how much damage, or here's how many hit points you have per level. Here's how you mitigate incoming damage per level. Here's how you perform damage by level. And again, those are going to be ranges because weapons tend to have ranges. It's a lot of work, yeah. There's some things where there's a chance you're going to avoid damage, so that means it's going to be a range.
Wait a minute. So I have a question. I just realized something. So you guys ever heard about how, you know, game studios release a game and you ask yourself, have they not played the game before? What if they just all use bots and they do the same thing as you do, who just developed based on what the bot's outcome is? And so ultimately there are overpowered things in the game. And then so they used a bunch of bots to see, oh, okay, so 50% of the bots reach that level. So it's got to be fine. Cakez, you heard about the quality assurance team? Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah. And so we still get dog shit games. Okay, we still get terrible balanced games. Diablo 4.
Then, so we pin that. Now let's go to creatures' hit points.
Bots, right? Probably bots.
Try to decide.
Yeah, probably.
Now that you know how much damage a player may be outputting, try to decide how many hit points you want a creature to have based on how many combat rounds you want it to be before the player can take them down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and put a pin in that. Let's stop right here and think about what we have. We now have hit points on both players and creatures. We have damage reduction from different sources. We have damage output for both players and monsters.
Yeah.
Take a look at all that. You want to take a look at all that and see what it means. How many rounds would a typical combat last? How big are the numbers? When things reduce those numbers, does the reduction look impressive? Remember, going from 100 hit points, I would have taken 100 to I would have taken 99. Isn't that impressive?
Yeah.
How many rounds is combat tending to last? As you go,
I did that too. So when I introduced my armor round, and you know physical damage wouldn't do anything anymore, I made it so that the enemies instead of taking 40 damage, they now took 10 damage. So it's a vast difference in damage output. Oh no, it was even crazier. They went from 60 damage down to 10. And then with the right weapon, they would take 22 damage. And so basically twice as much damage with the right weapon, but still vastly different damage when no armor. So I think that's the right idea, what he's talking about. Meaning stuff being impactful. Yeah.
Up levels, how do those numbers change? Mm-hmm. This is where you look at those and then you go, oh, I don't really like that. So you unpin one thing, back up, and recalculate. If you try to do it any other way, I find it's too complicated. You lose track of things. You're pulling out too many pins at once, and everything just kind of falls apart.
I see. So essentially what he's saying, to put that into a game's perspective, we start in round 1. We place down a defender. And the very first thing you do is, without any investment, without anything, you place the defender against one enemy and you check how long it takes the defender to beat 1, 2, 3. So it would assume, no wait. So it looks like it takes 4 hits to beat one of these guys. 1, 2. So it took him 4 hits. Meaning with an upgrade, maybe it takes him 3 hits now. And so that's actually how I started too. So I started with 4 hits and then I was like, wait a minute. Okay, so My upgrade, any upgrade I do should turn this to 3 hits because it feels better. Good that the rusty sword and crawlers are pinned. Yeah, so those 2 things are pinned, essentially. The starting damage on the crawlers and the upgrade damage on the crawlers. Because every upgrade path for a weapon will turn 4 to 3 hits. Yes. Cool. That's how you can begin.
Here's an example. Let's say you're trying to think of a new weapon or a new spell or some new ability. Think about, when does it enter the game? What player level do you expect it to enter the game? You now have a good idea of how much damage it should do.
I feel so accomplished because that's what I started doing. I feel like I was in the right direction already. Damn. Guys, maybe I'm meant to make games. Maybe we have a talent.
To other things you've already thought of, like the weapons that you already put in the game.
Yeah.
Now, there are complexities that I've just touched on here. For example, damage comes in different types. You may have normal damage, you may have fire damage, you may have acid damage. Your normal damage may be broken down into crushing damage and impaling damage. And
that would be too much, but yeah.
And cutting damage. So all of that factors into the type of damage that comes in and the type of damage that gets mitigated. So that shows up in your attack and defense parts of your calculations. You may have monsters that have multiple attacks. Either they can do multiple attacks around of different types, or they may do different types of damage. They may appear in groups. They can summon other things. So halfway through a combat, they may summon 3 more of themselves or 3 other types of monsters. You have to take all that into account as damage output. Speaking of damage output, that itself can come in multiple different ways. There's constant damage output. When you're swinging the sword, you tend to hit. Like, especially in Outer Worlds, we didn't roll to hit, so you could really calculate a constant amount of damage every round.
Okay.
Compare that to
Outer Worlds is always hit damage. Yeah.
Damage, where you may be miss, and then you hit and you do a lot of damage. Or spells that magic users can cast, but it takes them longer than, a fighter may get in 3 hits, and then the mage's one spell goes off and does a bunch of damage.
Yeah.
If you calculate the damage per second, that spell or the miss hit type of melee is spiky. It does nothing and then a lot. It does nothing and then a lot.
Wait, do we still have this? I think I saved this into an Excel sheet. I might have deleted it though. No, I deleted it. God damn it. I actually did an Excel sheet here. We had an Excel sheet with the damage, the armor, and the results. Law of damage too, of course, yeah.
So you have to calculate that, and that's why I tend to do damage per second. I calculate everything, and here's how much damage I expect to do per second.
I can't undelete it.
Similarly for charge-up abilities. If you have to build up an attack, you either have to hit things several times, and then you can do your power attack, or you can only charge up and do this attack once every 10 seconds. That's a form of spiky, and again, you reduce it to damage per second. Now, does all this sound hard? Welcome to Game.
With that, yeah, that's hard. That's the hardest part for me at the moment, bro. Welcome to game development. Yes, that's exactly it, man. I've been procrastinating on that for the longest time, bro. Did we make any good changes to this today? Actually, we didn't, right? We didn't pin anything down. Actually, no, that's not true. We almost pinned down the Dark Crawler, did we? So another enemy is almost pinned down. Yeah, and we pinned down the first 3 rounds. Okay, wow. Yeah, okay.
Design. This involves a lot of math. I find it's really useful to use something like Excel or some other spreadsheet to do these calculations. I find it's very easy to, when you think of it as, I'm going to put my pins in things like hit points and damage output per second and damage resistance per second. This gives you some very good base points to calculate everything else from. Now, I'm sure there are other designers with other methods. Oddly, I don't remember ever talking about this with other designers. I don't know what they did. I was never taught this. I've never even heard of a class that teaches it or a book that talks about it. If any of you know about that, mention it in the comments.
I think it comes in natural when you start to develop your game from the very first level and you build it up. So let's say you have a bunch of systems in your game. We could make the Vampire Survivors example. You start with the first level and then with the first wave. How many enemies spawn in the first wave? How much HP do they have? How fast do they run? and then you build your first ability to defeat the first wave. And that's how you start. Now you have the first wave and the first ability locked in and the first enemy. And then now that you have that, you move forward. You add another ability or another wave. And then you build, you balance the second wave. I think it's just something natural that happens when you develop your game. That's why no one talks about it. Because it seems to be something that just comes.
This is just one method you can do it. And also, if you choose this method, you don't have to do it in the order I just presented. I talked about doing hit points and then damage mitigation and then damage output and then creature hit points. You don't have to do it that way. You could start with damage output first and then figure out, okay, here's how many hit points I want things to have. So, and what you're really just trying to do is reduce everything to, here are abilities that ultimately will do damage. Here's how much damage a thing can take before it goes down, which is a combination of its total hit points and any way it has to mitigate
any
damage.
resistances, yeah.
This will give you an idea of how long it would take to bring down a creature and how long it would take a player to be brought down. Those numbers alone can let you do things like figure out how many creatures you should put in an encounter at a particular level. Because if you put in too many, it's going to take the player down in a fewer number of rounds than they could take down the attackers.
Because they don't have enough damage
with
output.
Randomness in there, it can still happen that the player can die. But if you always make sure that all the other things being equal and with random rolls, if you expect the player to be able to kill 3 wolves at level 1 before the player would run out of hit points, that's usually going to happen. Remember, in these charts, you make her by level. You may want to vary it by level. If you want your game to feel like it's getting a lot harder, you'll reduce how many rounds it takes a creature to take a player out.
So basically, they do
usually
more damage.
Games get a lot easier because people do the same curve, but the abilities they get introduce a lot of spiky damage or charge damage, which is harder to calculate, and then the player ends up taking out creatures a lot faster than you would expect.
Yeah.
This is just something you're going to have to figure out how to handle mathematically when you pin things. Anyway, I hope this helped.
Yeah, it did. It did.
Josh and Parker, I hope this answered your question. That's as straightforward as I can explain it. And like I said, I've never been taught this. I don't know what other designers do.
Cool.
But this is how I've always done my games.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea to do it like this. Especially the part where I talked about. So
Try to
what I
decide-
wrote down was, and I think the most important thing to take into account was, turn everything that you have in the game into DPS and reduction per second. So damage per second and reduction per second. And try to balance those two against each other. And then you can come up with the time, how long it takes you to kill something. And if the time is too long, in your opinion, then you might have to change one of the two, either the DPS or the resistance per second, the defense per second. It's actually really good, a really good idea. And then another thing is to type that into Excel. Ultimately, you get a very nice overview, and it's faster to test in Excel. Let's say, for example, it's faster to test how much a sword would deal in terms of damage when you have, differences of, let's say, 0.5% damage increase or something. You have a very nice list below. Instead of typing in the damage change, right? Then going into the game, making the sword swing, writing down how much it was. Like, that is super slow and can be tedious, even if you can update your game in real time. Because the act of typing in this change from 60 to 50 is still slower than just putting it in Excel. Obvious things are obvious, Yeah, it looks like these are mostly obvious, I agree. But still, for the most part, it's... So you know how you do something right when you do something right for the first time, but you don't know that you're doing it right?